anyway, just as you're leaving, as it were, before you leave, you had gone in, having worked very closely in the planning in the last short period with the military. What was the relationship once DFID personnel were in South Iraq with the military? How did that relationship affect your effectiveness?
Well, on the ground, in Sierra Leone, East Timor, Bosnia, so on, we'd always had good relationships with the military because we're can-doers and so are they on the ground. You know, we all want to get on with it and make things work. Of course, in this case, it was totally different because we'd been frozen out. I think that affected my relationship with Boyce. I got on very well with Guthrie before him, and we worked on Pakistan together and so on. But he'd been told to have nothing to do with me, obviously. And as people used to say, he spent a lot of his life in submarines, and it showed. He wasn't a chatty sort of chap. And when in the war cabinet, when I would go in each day and say, this is happening in Basra, this disorder, this electricity, it really annoyed him. He wasn't getting those kind of reports, so he thought I was sort of moaning. But it was true that these things were happening. But you can tell in a small meeting when someone's irritated, and he was irritated that I was bringing these reports. But that was my job. So that wasn't a very good relationship. But some of these military that have said to your committee, DFID were in their tents, etc., DFID is a very good organisation, and whatever doubts people might have had about the war, they know that when we've got to do what we've got to do and people have got to be helped, they'll do everything. It's admired throughout the world system as one of the most effective development organisations in the world, and I think that's just sort of moaning, and because it was a mess, they're looking for someone to blame, and of course DFID cannot work if there's chaos. That's the military's job under the Geneva Convention, to keep order. So I think Andrew Turnbull rejected those sulking in their tents type rubbish.
But the real issues, were you able to raise them directly with Jeff Hume, with the Secretary of Defence?
Well, I'd had Jeff Hume suddenly, there's a flurry of correspondence you might have seen. There's all this keep Clare and DFID out of it. And then just at the last minute, they're suddenly writing letters saying we must make preparations. And I'm saying to our military, you're going to have to feed people. And they suddenly, in the last week, they order food. I mean, it was mad. But they did it. And they wanted to get closer to us suddenly at the last minute. And we didn't sulk. Neither I nor the officials, the situation was too serious. But the chaos had its consequences. And that is a failure of the military, of both militaries, to take seriously their Geneva Convention obligations to keep order. And I think the British military should have said to Blair, we're not ready. And I think that was their duty, and they failed in that duty.
We'd like in a few moments to ask for your reflections, but before we do, to come to your own resignation. And there are two or three judgment questions I'd like to ask. And I suppose the first one is your concern about the growing prominence of the United States in the aftermath and the diminishing role for the United Nations is what brings you by the 12th of May to the point of resigning. But you said in your resignation letter that the negotiations for 1483, which defined, if you like, the relative roles of UN and the coalition afterwards, were secret. You would have been aware negotiations were going on a post-invasion UN resolution, wouldn't you?
Yes, but you have to remember, I was leaving the government. Tony Blair has me alone and persuades me to stay, asks me to, and promises the UN lead and asks me to stay and work on that and bringing the international community together. No. Then normally, when a UN resolution's being negotiated, there are lots of telegrams with each draft. Suddenly, none of that. Nothing. Can't see what's happening. So we knew they were talking about it.
But you were still relying on the undertaking that Tony Blair had given you.
Absolutely.
About the role of the UN.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then, so we were kept out, no telegrams, no seeing what words people were working for, none of that. And then suddenly we're told it's been agreed. I think we still hadn't seen it when we got to the ministerial meeting, and neither had anyone else. And then when I do, so there's a break of faith in what Blair had said to me personally, and then the resolution is feeble, and it isn't enough to get that international community coming in, which was the whole point of me staying.
I'd like to ask about 1483 and its content and also its effect in a minute. But was it a breach of faith, as you say, by Tony Blair to you? Because Andrew Turnbull, in evidence to us, in effect said it was Bush who said to the Prime Minister that the UN would have a vital role. Andrew goes on, he was fobbing us off. We took false comfort from it. That might have included, might it, Tony Blair?
Yes, I think, but Blair had said to me, please stay, I've had this promise, then I will need you to help me to get everyone back in so we can help Iraq to reconstruct. And that was the thing I said, OK, I'll go for this. Plus, I thought we were going to get a Palestinian state. Then there was the Hillsborough meeting and this vital role. Now, I think by then Britain didn't have much leverage because we'd given it all away, basically. I mean, what could Blair do then? But he didn't talk to me. So he didn't have the leverage, didn't get what he'd promised, and didn't even say, Claire, look, I'm sorry, I've tried, this is what can we do, da-da-da. So, hopeless.
It's speculative, but had he done that, might you have reconsidered your decision to go?
Don't know. But I don't know, because the other thing is it became obvious by his behaviour and people around him that the assurances to me had been about, I think, managing, not having Robin and I going on the same day, and not about what was said in the undertakings that were given.
You've been critical of the content of UNSCR's 1483. Is there an argument that it was, however limited the role for the United Nations that it conferred, that it did nonetheless work to bring the international community back together? I mean, those who had opposed the invasion, France, Germany, Russia and others, all came in behind 1483.
Well, I think the spirit of the Security Council was pretty broken and pretty unhappy. And people let that through. And there was this, we don't want blue wash anyway. We're not going to justify what you've done. You shouldn't have done it. It allowed the World Bank and so on in. Did it? I think Oil for Food maybe was done separately.
Yes.
So it didn't. People were with their bruises, but we've got to go on. Let them have this. But I mean, in letters that did start to flow around Whitehall again, the Japanese Prime Minister, the Indians, Mubarak phoned the Egyptian president, phoned Blair. They were all saying, get a strong UN afterwards and we'll all come in. So that was what was being lost, and that was on the record. So you have to deal with what you can do. The Americans wouldn't do anything. Blair was stuck because he had no leverage now, but it was pretty hopeless. And everybody knew that, and it wasn't enough to bring everyone in. And we could have got extra troops. We needed extra troops. If we'd had a stronger UN lead, we might have got that to keep order.
I'm going to ask you something you may decline to accept, but to ask you to put yourself in the position of Tony Blair in early May of 2003. The invasion has happened, the military side is pretty much done, and there has to be a United Nations Security Council resolution to try and build the thing back again. Were the terms of 1483, this is you in Tony Blair's seat, the best he could get from the Americans? Or you've spoken about the loss of leverage. Was it actually...
The truth is, I wouldn't have been in Tony Blair's seat. I would have said, first, a Palestinian state. First, George, if you want me. Really move on that, not just publish the roadmap. Let's get some progress on the ground. There's no hurry. Transform the atmosphere in the Middle East, get everyone to help us with settlements. Saying, secondly, I would have done it all through the UN. We would have been in such a position. The Middle East would have been happy. The world would have been cooperating. We would have got a beautiful resolution. Everything would have been better.
A counterfactual universe.
No, that was possible. That's what we should have tried for.
Yeah.